I will die on the hill that Mission Impossible is just the smart man's Fast and Furious. And this latest installment, and quite possibly its last, though we know that'll never be true, was easily the clearest analog for a Fast and Furious movie, with its constant hopping from one set piece to the next, and a shoestring plot holding those together, which you really don't need to pay attention to, all the way to the franchise just becoming a vanity project for its main actor, who also happens to be a major producer and decision maker behind the scenes, placing their own vice grip onto each production to a sometimes overbearing extent. But does that make Tom Cruise's final reckoning too self-congratulatory? And is there perhaps another video game this franchise actually takes its inspiration from? Let's find out as we dive into my thoughts on what I reckon is the 8th Mission Impossible movie. I think? Honestly, I lost count after Rogue Nation. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, your nihilistic optimist. And not that it's a trade secret or anything, just judging from the fact that I enjoy action movies, you could probably guess. But I have not gotten the chance to say how much I love the Mission Impossible movies. A love that started with Brad Bird's Ghost Protocol and only grown since then. All to say, I was anticipating this movie quite a lot, not necessarily needing it to be good, because that responsibility is squarely on these two summer blockbusters, but Tom Cruise made the months leading up to those at least somewhat tolerable for my non-existent patience. And aside from some minor critiques like a dense and self-indulgent plot, I really enjoyed this. And it clicked for me during the train sequence in the last movie, just because that was so similar. But what I've loved most about the best this franchise has to offer is that it's gotten away with making what, in my eyes, is the perfect Uncharted adaptation over and over again, featuring passable but still cliched romance subplots, and what the actual Uncharted movie was sorely missing, narrowly dodging a massive thing in engaging gravity-defying sequences. And there were a handful of scenes in Final Reckoning that had me immediately thinking of how gripping they could have been to play as set pieces, which sounds like it could be a negative, but is the highest form of compliment I can think of giving it, such as a rotating sub underwater, which was close enough to a set piece in the third Uncharted that I just went home after the movie and played that level, pretending I was Ethan Hunt instead of Nathan Drake. But putting aside those video game aspects, does Final Reckoning hold up as a continuation of Dead Reckoning and the rest of the series? Or more importantly, on its own right? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think I'm too terminally online and ingrained into this franchise to give you an unbiased answer. But in the context of this being a sequel to a long-running series, it absolutely worked for me. Nevertheless, the plot is pretty dense. Mission Impossible is no stranger to exposition dumps. In fact, I've come to expect them at this point, but there was just a lot of information to take in at times. At the start, even playing and weaving with time as it did so, making that scene fun and snappy, but admittedly hard to follow. Maybe I'm just dumb though. But one thing I can confidently speak on was the excess of plot devices in the narrative, which are typically used to simplify a story, but only complicated this one. And it sucks, because if the two MacGuffins in the plot were simplified into one, or if there was just more focus on the one that had an actual emotional connection to the characters, the story could have been infinitely better. But instead, that emotionally relevant device became non-existent for most of the movie, and the characters were going after another MacGuffin that needed to combine with the first. But not like the two key parts in the last movie, this was something else. All of which could easily overcomplicate the story for the audience, if not for the literal ticking clock constantly in the back of your mind, maintaining steady forward movement. Despite that, you really do feel the length, especially nearing the third act, though I was more than prepared for that to be the case. And keeping your attention, the action is clearly shot and edited with a sense of compelling fun being the priority. Nevertheless, and maybe it's just because I'm a huge fan of awesome martial arts hand-to-hand fight scenes, nothing in Mission Impossible has looked as good as it did in this fight scene in Fallout. But once I got past that, I did appreciate the talent on display here. You're kinda just waiting for the big stunt to come, but like Dead Reckoning Part 1, that worked in tandem with the narrative to create anticipation as the story went on. Yet, if you have anything against Tom Cruise and his weird antics, I can see the self-congratulatory nature of this whole movie to be a bit too much. However, I feel that Tom Cruise, Ralph McQuarrie, and everyone involved with the Mission Impossible franchise have all earned it, because this was nothing more than a victory lap, one that cemented my love for these big spectacle stunt movies and will keep Tom Cruise relevant for at least another decade. And if you've managed to have fun with those types of vanity projects in the past, whether it be a previous Mission Impossible movie or something else, go check out Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. But now, I gotta dive into the real meat of the sandwich, meaning I'm gonna have to get into some spoilers. Not too much, because I've already kinda said my piece on this movie, but you have been warned. And there were just some minor flaws here and there, such as treating the audience as dumb and having Ethan look at a torpedo tube as an alternate escape route, and instead of having everyone formulate that thought organically like we would've, the writers had Ethan verbally say torpedo tube. But again, that was minor. Yet something else that really fumbled the opportunity for an emotional impact was giving Ethan a second parachute, which just reminded me of Top Gun Maverick, an incredible movie that could have left me heartbroken, but simply could not let Tom Cruise die. And with this being what at least feels like a cap on the series, we could have had something special by finalizing Ethan's story. In no world do I believe we aren't going to get another Mission Impossible movie, but it was almost like Tom Cruise refused to pass the torch just yet. But that doesn't matter. What does is that I drove home from the theater thinking two things: that this was a pretty long but fun movie, and that there was a good chance Luther actually survived, changed his name to Marcellus Wallace, and that briefcase has the entity in it. Anyway, what did you think of Mission Impossible Presents Tom Cruise? Drop a comment below. And as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.